The moment I want to begin with in today's video is not dramatic. It is not a breakdown. It is not relief. It is not enlightenment. It is quieter than that. It is the moment you notice that time is no longer chasing you, not in a poetic sense, not in a philosophical sense, in a bodily sense. You wake up and the day does not lean forward. It does not pull you. It does not demand acceleration. The clock still moves. Your responsibilities still exist. You still function. But the pressure that used to sit underneath time is gone. And that absence is disorienting. Because urgency was never something you consciously chose. It was something you lived inside of for so long that you assumed it was life itself. So when it disappears, the first question is not curiosity. It is suspicion. Something must be wrong. This is usually where the misinterpretation begins. People assume they have become lazy, or passive, or disconnected, or numb. They assume motivation has faded, that ambition has collapsed, that something essential has shut down. But none of those explanations hold up when examined closely, because you are still present. You still act. You still move through your days with competence. What has disappeared is not function. It is pressure, and pressure is not the same thing as purpose. In the first 30 seconds of noticing this change, the mind often does something predictable. It searches backward. It tries to remember how things used to feel. There was a time when the future felt heavy, when tomorrow pressed into today, when decisions carried emotional urgency, even when they were trivial. You remember waking up already slightly late, even when you weren't. You remember the background tension, the sense that you were always behind something invisible. That sensation created momentum, but it also created anxiety. And most people confuse that anxiety for aliveness. So when it vanishes, the system panics. Because urgency was the fuel. Without it, the mind wonders what is driving anything at all. This is where I want to slow the frame, because this experience is often mislabeled as a loss. But what you are actually encountering is a reorganization of psychological time, not a slowing of life, not an escape from responsibility, a structural shift in how time is experienced internally. I want to be very precise here. Time itself has not changed. Your relationship to time has. And that relationship was never neutral. It was constructed. It was shaped by identity, by fear, by future-oriented pressure, by the need to become someone. Most people live inside a constant forward pull. Even when nothing is explicitly happening, there's always something implied, something to arrive at, something to secure, something to prove. This creates urgency even in stillness. And urgency, over time, becomes a default emotional background. You stop noticing it until it disappears. When this happened for me, it wasn't dramatic. There was no moment of realization, no insight. I just noticed that days were passing differently. I would look up and realize that hours had moved without resistance. Not because I was distracted, not because I was avoiding, but because there was no internal push. No inner voice saying, you should be further along by now. At first, this felt almost wrong. I remember sitting in a cafe, working on something that used to make me restless, and the restlessness didn't arrive. There was no sense of racing the clock, no sense of time being wasted or misused. The work happened, then it stopped, and that was it. No aftertaste of urgency. That was the moment I realized something fundamental had shifted. Not my habits, not my discipline, but the emotional charge attached to time itself. This is where many people become afraid, because urgency has been their compass. It told them what mattered. It told them where to go next. It created movement. Without it, direction feels ambiguous. And ambiguity is uncomfortable for a psyche trained to equate pressure with meaning. So the mind starts to search for explanations. Am I depressed? Am I disengaging? Am I avoiding life? Am I slowly disappearing? These questions feel serious, but they are based on a faulty assumption. The assumption is that urgency is natural, that life is supposed to feel rushed, that pressure is evidence of relevance. But urgency is not a feature of life. It is a feature of ego. Specifically, an ego oriented around future justification. The need to arrive somewhere in order to be legitimate. When that need dissolves, urgency dissolves with it. And this is where the experience becomes strange. Because nothing replaces urgency immediately. There is no new sensation that fills the gap. No excitement. No clarity. No heightened presence. Just space. And space feels empty if you were used to pressure. This is why this stage is often misread. People think something is missing, but what is missing is not vitality. It is compulsion. For most of your life, time was not neutral. It was loaded. Every day carried an implicit demand to improve, to progress, to optimize, to resolve something about yourself. Even rest was strategic. Even leisure had a function. So when that function collapses, time becomes ordinary. And ordinary feels unsettling when you were conditioned to live in urgency. This is why calm time is often interpreted as stagnation. But stagnation involves resistance. This does not. This is movement without tension, sequence without pressure. Life still unfolds, but it no longer leans forward aggressively. Carl Jung described urgency as a function of ego consciousness, not of life itself. The ego, when it believes it must arrive somewhere be whole, creates psychological time pressure. The future becomes charged. The present becomes insufficient. So the ego rushes, not because life demands it, but because identity does. When individuation stabilizes, that identity pressure relaxes, the ego is no longer tasked with proving existence. So time loses its emotional load. This does not make life flat. It makes it spacious. But spaciousness is unfamiliar. So the psyche initially resists it. There's often a subtle attempt to recreate urgency. People take on unnecessary projects, artificial goals, self-imposed deadlines. They miss the feeling of being pushed, not because it was healthy, but because it was familiar. I've seen this pattern repeatedly. People say, "I don't know what's wrong. Nothing feels urgent anymore." And they say it with concern, as if urgency were a vital sign, as if its absence signaled decline. But urgency is not aliveness. Urgency is threat. It is the nervous system responding to imagined future danger. The danger of not becoming enough, not doing enough, not arriving in time. When that danger dissolves, urgency dissolves. And what remains is a different relationship with time. Time stops demanding justification. You no longer feel the need to extract meaning from every hour. You no longer feel watched by the future. This can feel like floating. And floating can be frightening if you equated tension with structure. Structure used to come from pressure. Now it comes from rhythm. You still wake up. You still act. You still make decisions. But they are no longer fueled by anxiety. They are contextual, responsive. You act because something is needed, not because something is missing. This distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Without urgency, the future loses its authority. It no longer commands your present. It becomes a continuation, not a destination. And without that command, time feels wider. Days pass without resistance, not because they are empty, but because they are not being pushed against. This is often when people say, time feels strange. They don't mean slow. They mean uncharged. Time no longer carries emotional weight. And emotional weight was what made time feel dense. Without it, time feels lighter. And lightness is often mistaken for lack of meaning. But meaning was never located in urgency. Urgency only created motion. Meaning emerges from coherence, from living without internal contradiction, from not being chased by the future. This is why this stage often arrives after deep psychological integration. Once inner authority stabilizes, time anxiety dissolves. You are no longer trying to outrun yourself. You are no longer negotiating with an imagined future self. You are simply here, moving forward because life moves, not because you must. This does not make you passive. It makes you unpressured. And unpressured life feels unfamiliar in a culture built on acceleration. So the mind reaches for old explanations. Burnout, disengagement, loss of ambition. But burnout includes exhaustion. This does not. Disengagement includes withdrawal. This does not. Loss of ambition implies collapse. This does not. What has collapsed is a psychological engine that treated time as an enemy. You are no longer being chased. And when you are no longer being chased, you stop running. Not because you can't, because there is no reason to. This is a quiet realization that often lands at the end of this first phase. Nothing inside you is being threatened by time anymore. And without threat, urgency has no function. That does not mean life has stopped. It means it has stopped demanding proof. And that is a destabilizing kind of calm. Not dramatic, not comforting, just unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity is often where misinterpretation begins. But if you stay with it long enough, something else becomes clear. Time was never meant to feel urgent. Urgency was a byproduct of identity under pressure. When that pressure dissolves, time returns to its original state, neutral, sequential, uncharged. And living inside uncharged time feels strange only because you were never taught that it was possible. This is where this phase settles. Not with reassurance, not with explanation that resolves everything, but with a structural recognition. Life is still moving. It just isn't pushing you anymore. And that absence of push is not emptiness. It is a different form of stability, one that does not announce itself, one that takes time to trust, and one that many people misread before they understand it. After the initial disorientation settles, another layer becomes visible. It is subtler than the first. At first, you only notice that urgency is gone. Later, you begin to notice how much of your previous life was organized around it. This is not a nostalgic realization. It is not regret. It is closer to seeing the scaffolding of a building after the walls have been removed. You begin to recognize how many of your decisions were not responses to reality, but responses to time pressure that existed only internally. The pressure did not come from circumstances. It came from identity, from the idea that you were on your way somewhere, from the belief that life was an unfinished project that required constant acceleration. When that belief loosens, time loses its authority. And when time loses authority, the ego feels exposed, because urgency was one of its primary tools. Urgency kept the ego relevant. It gave it a task. It made it necessary. Without urgency, the ego does not disappear, but it becomes quieter. And in that quiet, you start to see something uncomfortable. Much of what you once called motivation was actually fear in motion. Fear of falling behind. Fear of missing the moment. Fear of not becoming what you were supposed to become. This fear did not feel like fear. It felt like purpose. And purpose driven by fear is extremely efficient. It creates constant movement, constant planning, constant self-evaluation. You measure yourself against time. Am I ahead? Am I late? Am I wasting this phase? Am I using this year properly? These questions once ran in the background almost continuously. You rarely question them because they were normalized, because everyone around you lived inside the same pressure field. So when that field collapses, the ego begins to panic quietly, not loudly, not dramatically. It simply does not know how to orient itself anymore. Without urgency, the ego loses its primary reference point. Before, the future functioned as a judge, a silent evaluator. Every action was weighed against an imagined outcome. Will this pay off? Will this move me forward? Will this matter later? Later was always watching. Now, later has gone quiet. Not because the future no longer exists, but because it no longer demands justification. This is where many people experience a strange internal emptiness. Not emotional emptiness, structural emptiness. The structure that once organized time has dissolved, and the ego, which depended on that structure, starts looking for replacements. Sometimes it tries to recreate urgency artificially. You may notice a sudden urge to set goals that don't actually matter to you, to manufacture deadlines, to fill time with unnecessary friction. This is not regression. It is the ego trying to reassert relevance. Because without time pressure, the ego has no leverage. Urgency allowed it to say, "You must act now." Without urgency, the ego has nothing to threaten you with, and threat was its primary motivator. This is an important point. Urgency is not neutral. It is built on imagined consequence. Something bad will happen if you don't move fast enough. That something is rarely specific, but it feels real, and that feeling keeps the ego in charge. When individuation progresses, this threat dissolves, not because life becomes safe, but because the ego is no longer positioned as the guardian of existence. You stop believing that failing to arrive somewhere on time threatens who you are, and when that belief dissolves, urgency collapses. This is why time pressure fades after inner authority stabilizes. Before that, the ego needs time anxiety to survive. After that, it doesn't. This shift is often misunderstood as loss of drive. But drive and urgency are not the same thing. Drive can exist without pressure. Urgency cannot exist without fear. Drive moves toward what is needed. Urgency runs away from what is feared. When fear dissolves, urgency disappears. Drive may remain, but it feels different. It is quieter, less insistent, more selective. And because it is quieter, it is often overlooked. You may notice that you still act, but you act later than you used to, not because you are procrastinating, but because you are no longer being whipped forward internally. You allow situations to clarify themselves before responding. This delay feels wrong to ego. The ego equates speed with control. If you move fast, you feel ahead. If you move slowly, you feel vulnerable. So when your pace changes, the ego interprets it as danger. But the danger is imaginary. What has changed is not your capacity to act. It is your tolerance for uncertainty. Before, urgency was a way to escape uncertainty. If you moved fast enough, you didn't have to sit inside not knowing. Now, not knowing no longer feels threatening. You can remain inside open time. And open time feels vast. This vastness is what many people describe as time feeling strange. It is not that time has slowed. It is that it has lost compression. Urgency compressed time. It made days feel dense, heavy, packed with implication. Without urgency, time expands. Moments feel longer, not because they last longer, but because they are not being pushed through. You are no longer trying to extract something from every experience. This extraction was another ego function. The ego treated time as a resource to be exploited. Every moment had to yield progress, meaning, or advantage. When that demand dissolves, moments are allowed to exist without output. And existence without output feels unfamiliar. The ego asks, what's the point of this? But that question assumes that time must justify itself. That assumption belongs to ego consciousness. Life itself does not require justification. It unfolds. The demand for justification comes from identity, not from reality. This is why Jung observed that urgency belonged to the ego's future orientation. The ego is always leaning forward, always anticipating, always positioning itself relative to what is coming next. When the ego is no longer the center, that leaning forward stops. Not abruptly, gradually. You stop living in anticipation. And anticipation was the emotional engine of urgency. Without anticipation, there is no rush. This does not mean you live only in the present. It means the present is no longer insufficient. The future no longer casts a shadow over now. And when the present is no longer inadequate, time pressure loses its function. This is where another fear often emerges. If I'm not rushing, am I still moving? Movement used to be measured by speed, by acceleration, by visible progress. Now movement becomes subtle, internal, contextual. You still grow, you still change, but not according to a timeline imposed by anxiety. This creates a mismatch between inner experience and cultural expectation. Culture rewards urgency. It celebrates busyness, deadlines, pressure. So when you step out of that rhythm, you may feel invisible, not to others, to yourself. You are no longer performing time. You are no longer signaling importance through speed. This can feel like disappearance. But disappearance of performance is not disappearance of being. What disappears is the constant self-monitoring. The ego was always watching itself in time. Am I late? Am I early? Am I on track? That internal commentary fades, and silence replaces it. This silence can be unsettling. Because the commentary provided a sense of continuity. Even if it was stressful, it made you feel like you were in the game. Without it, the game dissolves, and you are left with simple sequence. One thing happens, then another. No scoreboard, no countdown, just unfolding. This is where many people misinterpret calm as emptiness. They think something has been lost. But what has been lost is narrative pressure. The story that life must go somewhere specific at a certain speed to be valid. Without that story, time stops feeling dramatic. And drama was what made life feel intense. Intensity is often confused with depth, but intensity usually comes from conflict, from tension between where you are and where you think you should be. When that tension dissolves, intensity fades. Depth does not require tension. Depth requires contact, and contact happens more easily when time is not pushing you. This is why many people at this stage say that experiences feel simpler. Not dull, simpler. You enjoy things without amplifying them. You work without dramatizing it. You rest without guilt. Guilt was another function of urgency. Guilt punished you for not using time correctly. Without urgency, guilt loses its reference point. You stop measuring rest as wasted potential. Rest becomes rest. This neutrality is deeply destabilizing to the ego, because the ego relied on dissatisfaction to stay active. If you were always slightly dissatisfied, you kept moving. Now satisfaction is no longer tied to progress. You can be content without arriving anywhere. This does not make you passive. It makes you less manipulable. Time pressure is one of the most effective tools of control, not external control, internal control. When urgency dissolves, you're no longer easily pushed by imagined futures. You respond to what is actually happening. This responsiveness feels slower, but it is more accurate. You wait until something genuinely calls for action, not until anxiety demands relief. This waiting is not indecision. It is discernment, and discernment cannot be rushed. The ego dislikes this. It prefers immediate resolution. But immediate resolution often creates unnecessary movement for the sake of relieving pressure. Now that pressure is gone, movement becomes economical. You do less, but what you do is more aligned. This is another reason people fear this stage. They equate doing less with becoming less. But quantity of action was never a measure of vitality. It was a measure of tension. Without tension, action becomes precise, and precision feels sparse. This sparsity can feel like absence, but it is absence of waste, not absence of life. At this point, another realization often lands quietly. You were never behind. The sense of being behind was created by a future that was constantly moving away from you. Now that future has stopped pulling, so the sense of lateness disappears. And with it, the panic. This does not mean you have arrived. It means arrival is no longer the organizing principle. Life no longer feels like a race. It feels like a sequence of responses. This is where time becomes humane, not optimized, not weaponized, just lived. This is not something you decide. It happens as a consequence of inner reorganization. The ego steps back from center stage, and time, no longer pressed into service by anxiety, returns to its neutral state. This is why trying to recreate urgency rarely works. It feels artificial. You can set deadlines. You can push yourself. But the emotional charge does not return, because the belief that made urgency meaningful is gone. You no longer believe that failing to rush threatens your existence. And without that belief, urgency has no foundation. This can feel like standing on unfamiliar ground, solid but strange. The ground does not move you. You move when needed. This is a shift taking place here. Not a loss of time anxiety, not a slowing of life, a release from being chased by it. And this realization often settles without fanfare. It does not resolve the discomfort completely, but it reframes it. You begin to see that what feels strange is not wrong. It is simply unfamiliar. Time without urgency does not announce its value. It does not reassure. It just exists. And learning to trust that existence takes longer than learning to run. But once you see how much of your life was organized around fear disguised as momentum, it becomes difficult to unsee. Urgency was never proof that you were alive. It was proof that something inside you felt threatened by time. Now that threat has quieted, and what remains is not emptiness. It is unpressured continuity. Life, moving forward without demanding that you chase it. There is a point where the question quietly changes. First, the concern is about what has been lost. Then, it becomes a matter of what remains. You begin to notice that even without urgency, life continues to organize itself. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but reliably. Things still need attention. Decisions still appear. Events still unfold. Yet they arrive without pressure. And this is where the final misunderstanding often dissolves. Because you realize that urgency was never what made life move. It only made life feel intense. Movement itself does not require anxiety. It requires responsiveness. This distinction becomes clearer the longer you live without time pressure. You notice that action still happens, but it happens closer to necessity, not anticipation. Before, you acted to stay ahead of an imagined future. Now you act because something is actually present. This shift is subtle but profound. It changes the emotional texture of everything. Work no longer feels like a race against time. It becomes a sequence of tasks that begin and end. There is no emotional residue afterward. You complete something and it releases. It does not cling to you as proof of worth. This is one of the quiet markers of this stage. The past loosens its grip, not because it is resolved, but because it is no longer needed as reference. Before, past achievements or failures helped orient you in time. They told you whether you were ahead or behind. Now, that comparison loses relevance. The past becomes informational rather than evaluative. It exists, but it does not comment on you. Similarly, the future loses its narrative authority. You still plan. You still consider consequences. But the future no longer feels like a destination that will finally justify the present. It becomes an extension, not a promise. And without that promise, pressure fades. This is often where people expect some kind of revelation, a sense of freedom, a heightened presence. But what actually arrives is quieter. Neutrality. Life becomes less dramatic. And this can feel anticlimactic if you expected growth to feel exhilarating. But exhilaration was tied to pursuit, to tension, to wanting something that was not yet here. When that wanting dissolves, exhilaration dissolves with it. What replaces it is steadiness. Steadiness does not announce itself. It does not feel special. It simply supports life without friction. This is why many people struggle to trust it at first. They look for signs. Am I still engaged? Am I still alive? Am I still moving forward? But these questions arise from a framework that no longer applies. Forward no longer means away from now. It means through now. Life continues by passing through you, not by pulling you towards something else. This changes how you experience waiting. Waiting no longer feels like delay. It feels like part of the sequence. Before, waiting was unbearable because time felt scarce. Every pause felt like lost opportunity. Now, pauses have no moral weight. They are not judged. They simply occur. And because they are not judged, they are easier to inhabit. You can remain still without feeling left behind. This is not resignation. It is release. Release from the idea that stillness must be justified. Another shift becomes noticeable around decision-making. Decisions used to feel urgent because they were imagined to lock in the future. Choosing wrong felt catastrophic. Choosing late felt dangerous. Now, decisions feel lighter, not because they don't matter, but because they are no longer loaded with identity. You are not choosing who you will become. You are choosing what fits now, and what fits now can change later. This flexibility was always possible, but urgency made it feel forbidden. Urgency demands commitment to imagine futures. Without urgency, commitment becomes situational. You commit while something is alive, and you release when it is no longer required. This does not create instability. It creates accuracy. You respond to life as it is, not as it should be according to a timeline. This is often when people notice that their relationship to aging changes. Time passing no longer feels like loss, not because youth is denied, not because decline is romanticized, but because time is no longer something to beat. Aging becomes part of the sequence, not a countdown. Years pass, but they do not threaten. They simply add context. This removes a great deal of background anxiety. You are no longer racing against your own life. You are living inside it. This also affects how you relate to others. You stop measuring your pace against theirs. Someone else rushing no longer infects you. Someone else slowing down no longer triggers comparison. Different rhythms can coexist without friction. This was not possible when urgency ruled. Urgency demanded synchronization. Everyone had to move fast or be left behind. Now, coexistence becomes easier. You can remain steady while others accelerate or stall. Their movement does not dictate yours. This creates a sense of internal autonomy that does not require isolation. You are not detached. You are not withdrawn. You are simply no longer pulled out of yourself by time anxiety. This autonomy is often mistaken for indifference, but indifference implies lack of care. This is not that. Care remains, but it is no longer frantic. You care without trying to outrun outcomes. You engage without needing to secure the future. This changes how disappointment is experienced. Before, disappointment felt like failure, because failure meant falling behind. Now, disappointment is contextual. Something did not unfold as expected, and life continues. There is no added layer of panic, no sense that time has been wasted beyond repair. This resilience does not come from optimism. It comes from not tying self-worth to temporal success. You are no longer trying to justify your existence through progress. So setbacks do not threaten identity. They remain events, not verdicts. Another quiet change appears around enjoyment. Pleasure becomes simpler, less intense, but more available. You no longer chase peak experiences. You notice ordinary ones. This is not settling. It is recalibration. Intensity required urgency. You had to grab moments before they passed. Without urgency, there is no need to grab. So pleasure does not spike. It spreads. It becomes something you step into rather than seize. This can feel like loss if you equated aliveness with intensity. But intensity often masks anxiety. Without anxiety, pleasure becomes gentle. And gentle pleasures are easy to overlook if you are searching for fireworks. This stage asks something subtle. Not effort, not understanding. Tolerance. Tolerance for a life that does not constantly stimulate. Tolerance for time that does not demand. Tolerance for meaning that is not extracted through pressure. This tolerance develops gradually. You learn that nothing collapses if you do not rush. Life does not punish you for moving at a humane pace. On the contrary, it becomes more coherent. You notice patterns more clearly. You see cause and effect without distortion. Because urgency distorted perception. It made everything feel immediate and catastrophic. Without it, proportion returns. You can tell the difference between what matters now and what can wait. And this discernment is one of the most practical outcomes of this stage. It is not glamorous, but it is stabilizing. You stop spending energy on imagined emergencies, and that energy returns as availability. Availability to respond when something genuinely requires you. This is where life becomes quieter but more exact. You act when action is needed. You rest when rest is appropriate. There is no emotional tax attached. This neutrality is often what people mean when they say time feels flat. But flatness is not absence. It is evenness. The highs are lower. The lows are shallower. And in between, life continues. This continuity can feel strange if you were accustomed to cycles of intensity and collapse. But it is sustainable. You are no longer burning fuel to stay ahead of time. You are moving with it. This does not make you timeless. It makes you temporal in a different way. You live inside sequence rather than against it. This is perhaps the final correction. Time was never the enemy. Your relationship to time was. When that relationship reorganizes, time returns to being what it always was, a medium through which life unfolds. Not a force that judges, not a threat that must be outrun, not a resource that must be optimized, just passage. And passage does not require urgency. It only requires presence, not heightened presence, not mindful presence, ordinary presence, being where you are without negotiating with what comes next. This is not a practice. It is a consequence of no longer needing time to validate you. This is why the question that began this video slowly loses relevance. What am I living inside of if nothing is pushing me anymore? The answer does not arrive as an explanation. It arrives as experience. You are living inside a life that no longer needs to threaten you into motion. A life that unfolds because it unfolds. And that realization settles quietly, not with certainty, not with relief, but with a kind of grounded continuity. Time continues. You continue. But neither of you is in a hurry anymore. And that is not the end of movement. It is the end of being chased. When urgency dissolves, it can feel as though something essential has been removed from life. But what has actually fallen away is not direction. It is not meaning. It is not movement. What has fallen away is a belief that time must pressure you in order for life to remain real. Urgency once created intensity. Intensity once created the feeling of being alive. When that structure collapses, life does not stop. It becomes less dramatic, less charged, less self-referential. Time continues to pass. Events continue to unfold. Choices continue to be made. But none of them demand that you justify yourself through speed. This is not detachment. It is not withdrawal. It is not fading. It is life no longer organized around threat. You are not living inside emptiness. You are living inside continuity, without pressure. And that difference is subtle enough to be misunderstood. But once seen, it explains why nothing feels wrong, even though everything feels different. If this description reflects something you've been quietly noticing in your own life, you're welcome to stay connected to this channel. You can subscribe if you want to continue exploring these later psychological stages without urgency, advice, or performance. If someone you know has been unsettled by the sense that time no longer pushes in the way it used to, sharing this video may help them recognize what's actually happening. And feel free to leave a comment, not to explain or solve anything, but simply to reflect on how time feels for you now.